Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HCD VidCast of our curious conversations. Today, we're talking about habit loops. So welcome to our conversation. Welcome back to those of you that have been on this journey with us, and a hearty welcome to those of you that are new. My name is Michelle Niedziela, and I'm VP of Research and Innovation at HCD. And as always, I'm joined by Kathryn and Ambroze.
Hi everyone, welcome back. And if you're new here, we are very thrilled to have you. I am Kathryn Ambroze, Manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with our Research and Innovation team here at HCD. And I'm thrilled to chat about habits and habit loops. It's a topic I'm really passionate about. But before we get into it, I'm going to let Michelle share a little bit about HCD.
Sure. So this is the HCD VidCast where we go over some slides and have some conversations about particular topics. HCD is a research house providing clients with a holistic understanding of consumer behaviors, how they perceive things, evaluate things, and respond to different types of stimuli and situations. We've been around for over 35 years using a variety of different tools. We have a large toolbox full of what we call applied consumer neuroscience, which is a combination of traditional tools like qual and quant approaches, as well as psychological approaches to understanding consumers and neuroscience, so where we use neuroscience tools. We put all those things together to have a better holistic understanding of the human experience, all the way from early stages of exploration in your research to the end of validation, from product development all the way through marketing across the gamut. Our research has been done globally, anywhere that there are people. We can measure them either online or in person. So we have mobile biometric labs, or we can do mobile research as well. Today, we're talking about habit loops, and it's a really interesting topic because it's something we talk about all the time. And it's really important when you think about consumers, because most of the things that people consume, whether it's, products or media, you can imagine TV shows or shampoos, or, you're using your devices in your home, all of those things are habitual, right? It's part of our lifestyle.
Exactly. And I feel like the phrase creatures of habit is used so frequently because it's really a matter of the way that people live their lives and their lifestyles. And there have been percentages actually that have been put out saying that it's it's a crazy range where it's 45 to up to 90% of our day is made up of habits. And that it shows how involved habits are in how we think and what we say, and just our overall actions that sometimes are just put on autopilot too.
And products are a huge part of our habits. If we just look at what people are doing here in these pictures, the person who's working out at the gym, like you might think of the habit as being exercising, but she's got a lot of products around her. She's going to an actual gym. She's running on a machine. She's wearing clothing, right? That is part of that habit. She probably has products that she uses, maybe it's deodorants, or maybe there's a body wash she uses after her workout. Maybe there's a particular water that she's drinking. All of these things are part of her habit.
Absolutely. And I think also within habits, there's also this idea of brand loyalty. They're very much interconnected, because if a brand or, like you said, a product is within the habit and it's in that idea of this habit loop, which we'll touch upon, it's very hard for you to stray away from it, and you go out seeking it because it's very much included in your routine.
And that's why it's so important for companies out there to really consider habit. A lot of times, I think in research and consumer research, people are so focused on the product, right? So maybe the water company is really focused on the water, right? They're focused on manufacturing the bottles or sourcing the water. But you really have to think how the consumer is really integrating it into their lifestyle. And the way they're doing that is integrating it into their habits, whether it's they take that water and put it in their car, or they keep it in the refrigerator, or what store they always go to, right, to buy their water. So all those sort of things are really important for the companies to think about, because if we just focus on the product, then we miss how the consumer is actually bringing it into their lifestyle.
Right. And
which means you're missing opportunity.
Right. And I would also take it a step further with that water example and say, you want to also be able to learn the lifestyles of not just people that are using that product, but the people that aren't. Are people that are a little bit more health conscious and interested in sustainability, trying to use reusable water bottles as opposed to, something that's made of plastic? And what are ways that you can try to also appeal to those people by making things a little bit more eco-friendly,
Yeah.
and fitting their narrative?
And as our conversations often do, maybe we're going off on a little tangent here, but it's also important to think about these things because, if you were to change anything about your product, you might very well alienate them, which is a conversation we've had before, right?
Right.
But understanding habit is part of that, because if you're leading with a product focused research plan, then you're not thinking about how it integrates into someone's lifestyle. So let's move on to really think about what habits really are. And, the approach that we have for habits, we really took it from a very psychological, view of habits. And here, it's defined by the American Journal of Psychology as a fixed way of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it really is kind of what we've shared. It's habits are really lifestyles. So it's interesting because so many people have written books about habits. And if you look at the titles that are kind of surrounding this slide, they're all about good or bad or power or effective, like being productive. And it's interesting because that's what's intriguing people, is that habits, they really motivate people to go through a routine of some sort. But we do want to mention that the truth is a habit doesn't know if it's good or bad. And,
Right.
good
It's just what you do.
Right, exactly. And it could be argued too that good habits can be bad if they're not done in moderation and they're done in excess.
And I think when we talk about this sometimes with clients, I think that's their viewpoint too, is that they're thinking about it like good and bad habits. And that's because when you think about it from the psychological view of habits, it's usually about correcting habits, right?
Exactly.
So like if you're trying to lose weight, then we need to rethink about how your habits are for snacking, let's say. For example, if you're always, getting a latte and a cake pop in the afternoon, right? And this isn't fitting into your new diet plan, like that's your habit. It's hard to break because you've done it, say, every day. What can you go about changing that habit? And so when psychologists look at that, they look at the habit loop. So what is causing you to do that habit? And that's an interesting way to think about it. It's very helpful from a psychological treatment standpoint, but for us, it's also really important to think about from a product use standpoint. So what's triggering you, right?
Exactly. I feel targeted with that K-pop example.
I swear I wasn't talking about you.
But it's very true. And I think to also just say a little bit more on that is that you also want to make sure that the expectation is really being met. So when I personally go to Starbucks to get a cake pop, I want a treat. I really would like something sweet and that's my reward. So you want to consider those habit loops. If Starbucks comes out with something that they made a reduced sugar cake pop, I don't know if I necessarily want that, because my intention is to get something that's safe, that's really sweet and rewarding to me.
So let's jump into this habit loop thing, because when it came from the psychological sort of like treatment, the cognitive behavioral treatment sort of approach, it was really about, again, taking that bad habit, right, and seeing, well, what is your cue? What's triggering you to do this thing you don't want to do anymore? And in the case of having the afternoon snack, is it that it's hunger? Is that your cue to reach for the chips? Again, I'm not targeting anyone. And you could even, let's think about it with smoking as well. Like, what's the cue? Is it that you see somebody else smoking? Is it just that it's the time of day that you typically go for that cigarette or go for that chip? Right. What's the routine around it? Is it that it gets you out of your chair? You got to get up and go get something. Is it that it's on your car ride home from work? And then what are the rewards? What are you getting from that habit? from that behavior. When you have that cigarette, are you feeling relieved? When you have those chips, are you feeling less hungry? When you have that cake pot, are you feeling happy, right? Because
Right,
it is an
right,
indulgent treat. So all of our habits are made up of these things, and that's what makes us do it again, right? So the cue gets us started. The routine is how we go through it, and that reward lets us know that it was worthwhile doing, right? So you're
right,
going to do
exactly.
it again. And it's a formula that builds how we get through our day. So when we think about how people interact with products, this is a very helpful schema to sort of set up understanding why people are even using your product, right?
Right. And I think that you brought up a really great point by sharing that the habit performance, it really is based on context. And when you're thinking about where your particular product or service fits in that context, it could be triggered or cued by anything such as a person, a place, an item, and like you said, the time of day. So it really is that you want to consider the context of things and where
Mhm.
your particular company fits into, or your brand fits into that habit loop,
Yeah.
to really get that satisfied result.
And this is
Um,
a very behavioral economic approach to things, because this really is how you move a very conscious behavior into a more system one behavior, right? So if you do something new for the first time, like let's say use a product you've never used before, right? So let's say in the past we talked about meal prep, right? So let's say you've never used meal prep before, and you're going to try it out. Well, it's really important to make this more system one rather than system two, right? So if you can integrate into someone's lifestyle by making it more habitual, where it takes less effort to make that decision, just like having the meal prep thing boxes come to you without even having to think about it, right?
mhm.
Kind of like the joke is about Amazon, that it starts sending you packages before you even realize you wanted that thing. you know yeah, but it is kind of like cutting to the chase. So the less someone has to think about it, then the more habitual it becomes as part of their lifestyle, right?
Exactly. And I think when we go to the next slide, it touches on that really nicely by sharing how things do become basically automatic over time. And the example that we have here is the student driver. So when you're first learning how to drive, you're overstimulated sometimes with how much you have to be focusing on and paying attention to, and you're very mentally engaged in every single component of the driving experience. But as you keep going on and building connections and building those habit loops for whatever your driving experience is, that's how the habit develops. And companies do take advantage of that. As you can,
Absolutely.
yeah, as you can see with apps do it all the time. Snapchat has these little emojis to nudge people into the direction of using their product every day by having streaks. And if somebody has, it's a number that's really rewarding the person for continuing their consistency with that product. And if the product is not being used, or if you or your quote unquote best friend, the person you're sending the Snapchat to, hasn't responded, you get a little hourglass figure as a reminder saying your time's almost up. And it's really enforces this
Yeah.
habit loop, to keep your number going and stay consistent and
Mhm.
remain as a quote unquote best friend. So it's a perfect example of this cue, routine, and reward.
But
Um,
it can happen very unassumingly too, right? So
mhm.
if you're thinking about someone just using a shampoo where it's not actually listed out for them all the the cues and the rewards of it, as it becomes more part of, as you practice at it more, right, you use the shampoo more, and it becomes part of your habit where you're used to getting that fragrance, right, that specific fragrance, and it rewards you, and the lather is just right, and you're triggered to use it at certain times, you're triggered to buy it because now you know what you're looking for. As that becomes more part of your usage and more part of your lifestyle, the more loyal you are to the brand. So when you start thinking about brand loyalty, well, you really do need to consider habits, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And that really brings us to our behavioral science approach, is to being able to get habits to fit the perceptions and to fit the expectations of of the consumer. And you really do want to remain consumer centric because it's their lifestyles you're influencing with your product.
Because too often, I mentioned earlier, when we're product centric, we don't think about how the product really fits into their lifestyle. But that also includes that if we're going to take a consumer centric look, then we have to remove our sort of product development lens, which often involves us using language that consumers simply wouldn't use. So if I say lather, is that actually something that a consumer would say when they're talking about how it feels to use your shampoo, right? Little things like that, the nuances that a consumer might talk about might be totally different from the way that a product developer or a brand marketer or brand manager might talk about the product.
Right. And you really, when you're considering habit loops, it does present this opportunity within the product development experience to understand those cues, routines, rewards, to build positive habits through the brand and really nudge people by connecting the language closer to that consumer by saying words that they would personally use.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a really great tool for us to consider when considering the product design experience and just the product experience overall.
Or any updates, reformulations, or maybe even larger scale innovations that you might be thinking, because we're always talking about how new products are very likely to fail in the market. But there is a push these days of, if you take a more consumer centric research approach to the development, that you can have more successful products. But I think also, if you look for opportunities that better fit into people's lifestyles, that you can really access these cues and these rewards to understand, to get people into a habit loop of using your product, that you have then a greater chance of market success. So
Michelle,
how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you.
So it's basically like 3 phases that we go through. Once we have that consumer language, which either, we've gotten from the client's previous research, they're doing focus groups and qualitative work all the time, or we'll do new qualitative research to get that language. We can take that language, that consumer language that describes the cues, routines, and rewards, and we can do research to identify need gaps. And to do that, we start with consumer expectations, which really are the needs. And we can get that through MaxDiff. So if we take this terminology and we have people do what's called a forced comparison, right? Forced choice test, where they're ranking different needs to see which ones are more important or which ones are more likely to drive their behavior, let's say purchase, or to drive the behavior. Let's take water, for example. Is it more important that the product is available, or is it more important that it is cheap, right? What's going to drive them to purchase that particular brand?
Right.
Then we look at sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention that these associations really do guide habits by linking these certain cues and the certain triggers to the specific outcomes, like we had discussed in the habit loops. So by really understanding these associations and seeing where they fall, it does share this area of opportunity.
Exactly. So then we have to get those associations, right? So then we have to look at the consumer perceptions by using like an implicit approach, implicit reaction time, where we have people say, look at your particular brand and find out if you actually perceive that brand as having that quality. So do you actually see it as affordable? Do you actually see it as available? So then you can see, like, okay, if the consumer's most important need is that it is available, and their perception of you is that you're not as available as another brand, well, that's a need gap, right? So once we identify that need gap, then we can look at that certainty value, which is really, okay, now if we look at the sort of critical mass of people that agree, and compare it to those perceptions, then we can see, like, do we actually have an opportunity to meet that need? So if most people don't see us as being at all available, that means it's going to be a higher hurdle for us to be able to achieve, right? So when we look at these opportunities that are presented by the need gap, we need to be able to assess if it's too big of a thing for us to overcome, or is it something that is, a lower hanging fruit that we can just change pretty easily? Like, if it is availability, is it just that they're not used to seeing it? Is it something we can increase with marketing, right?
Exactly.
Or is it something we can increase by putting it out at more stores, whatever it might be? Is that something we can actually do? And then that brings us to the nudges part, which is usually like a practice we do with the client to really find out, okay, we've identified that this is the need gap. We see it as a really strong opportunity with a lot of potential. How can we go about doing that makes most sense for this particular client, this particular brand or product? And then we can behaviorally design something to meet that need. So again, if it is that you're looking for something that is more indulgent, let's say, than just plain water, then is it that you can achieve that indulgent feeling, that rewarding indulgence, that treat, by having it be sparkling, right? Or having a hint of flavor to it, or having a more fancy looking bottle? Like, what is going to achieve that perception?
Right. And I also would mention that with this, as you learn about places of certainty as well as opportunities to improve and innovate, but it also can help you learn where you can disrupt and kind of ease your way into a habit loop. So that way your product, maybe your product should try to fit inside a already existing habit loop rather than really venture to create a new one. It helps to build success in the market.
Absolutely. So that concludes our discussion today on habit loops, why we think it's so important and so cool, and actually pretty easy when you think about it, right? So again, if we start with doing this consumer-centric, focused way of approaching consumer research, then it's pretty natural to look at their habits and to really try to understand how your product can fit into someone's lifestyle. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Kathryn, for another wonderful conversation.
Yep, always happy to be here. And like always, we do have white papers available. If you're interested in some further reading, please like and subscribe to our channel, and please comment down below. Let us know if there's anything that you'd like to hear from us, or contact us directly. We'd be more than happy to begin a conversation.
We do share a lot of invitations, for example, to webinars that we have and events that we have, as well as some other blog posts and everything. If you follow us on LinkedIn, just look up HCD Research. Tweet with us below, where we're always sharing new information and thoughts on research that's being put out, or the news that's going on. You can visit our blog where we talk about a lot of these things. But join with us on all of these things that we're doing. It's super exciting, super fun. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again or for the first time. And we hope to have you join us next time.
Bye, everyone. Take care.